Don Mazzella here. I'm a bit in the shade right now because my lights have gone away. But anyway, all the way from Australia. When I was in Vietnam, I promised to call my mother every day. And if you knew the trouble I had doing that, but now we're sitting here, she in her room, office, me in my office, and we're talking. I'm always amazed by that. But anyway, that's off the subject. We have with us someone who I'm looking forward to hearing more about. It's Catherine Matiske. Am I hitting it close?
Matiske, yep.
Matiske. Okay, leave the A out. I want to leave everybody be Italian. What the heck? But anyway, Catherine, welcome to the program. And
Thank you.
you have an interesting company and an interesting book. But we'll first ask you a little bit about yourself, and then your company, a little bit, and your book, and finally your website.
So thanks, Don, for inviting me onto your show. And as you said, I'm from Australia. Currently, I'm in Melbourne in Australia. And I grew up in Adelaide, which is down the bottom in the middle. And even though I'm in Australia, most of my work is in the US and in Europe. So we do very little work in Australia. And so the pandemic has really meant that I just do a lot of night shift with US companies and just continue on with my work.
Okay. But how did you get in? What do you do for companies?
So what I do now is to really look at, for big organizations, in the way that their learning is structured within the organizations and how they can better communicate with internally and influence either within the organization or outside of the organization. My whole work has been around learning and development, and I've had my business for 27 years. And I started off my career in the computer industry in the days where everybody was just transitioning to their first PC and companies were just bringing in PCs for staff, and everyone did training courses on Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint in those days, and I was the trainer. And I quickly came to realize that some people in those training courses were really successful. They just picked it up really well. And other people were extremely fearful about that this thing in front of them would somehow swallow them up and they would make a tremendous mistake and the whole thing would blow up and all sorts of crazy thoughts because it was all new for so many people. And so I quickly realized that there was this group of people that were high performers, and why were they high performers? And it's really taken me my entire career to answer the questions that I had 30 years ago around why do some people, why are they successful? What are they doing on an everyday basis, whether they're in a large company or an individual consulting firm? What are some people doing that's different to others that make them really successful when it comes to learning new information and communicating and influencing other people and connecting? What are those people doing that's different? And that's been really the summation of my entire life's work.
I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to your website, please.
So it's the new website, which is attached to the new book, which is called Unlock Inner Genius. The website is innergeniusnow.com. So it's innergeniusnow.com. So that's where most of our work is going right now, because people are now able to access what I've been really locked up in very large companies doing. I've taken what I've been doing in very large business and organizations that are global organizations to everybody, so that they can now have that same opportunity that only was occurring in very large business. So whether you're a small business owner or a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, whoever you are, you can now get the same, a different version of what these big Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies I've been working with them on.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but well, first one is I saw an applicant, a a confidential search for a president of a multi-billion-dollar company, and one of the things they said on it, he or she must be facile in Word and Excel, and I found that very interesting. It was in the spec. I've never seen that before.
You would think that they would have bigger skills than that, right? In this day and age.
But anyway, so well, hold up your book for our audience to see it.
So this is my latest book. This is my 31st book, number 31, which is Unlock Inner Genius. And that's really very different to my other books that I've written, which have been all around learning and development and professional development of people. This one is really for that everyone market.
Okay. But now what's the basic premise of your book?
So if we go back in history, when we think about successful people, in the early 1900s, the IQ test came out, and that's still followed as a mark of intelligence. But the world has changed, and yet we still use that. And then in the 1990s, EQ, emotional intelligence, came out, and that had a big breakthrough in business and people going, wow, what's this emotional intelligence? And we still use that, but that's 30 years ago now. And so what I set about is to say, in this day and age, what is it that separates these successful people? And it's like they have this inner genius within them, and how can we all get a piece of that? And so I created Unlock Inner Genius, the book, and then a profile, and I've tagged that as GQ. So there's IQ, EQ, and now GQ, which is your genius quotient, which is different, because if we look at people who are super successful in the world, you would walk past them in the street and potentially just keep walking. Now, they're not easily identifiable, whereas once upon a time they were. And so the premise of the book is to say, how is it possible that everybody can access their own inner genius? How can they learn quicker? How can they connect with other people better? How can they change their communication to influence others, be it in a work environment, or maybe in a customer-facing environment, or maybe in a home environment? So I set about saying, okay, I've researched learning science and how learning works for my whole career. That's who I am. So what's the premise of that when we look at people who are super successful? What are
Catherine,
they doing?
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 minute. You should be looking at your camera, not me. I know I'm down there, but people will lose you. You've got to look at the camera and forget me, because people, it's something we all have to learn. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're saying so much that's so good. I want people to focus in on that.
Okay.
Please continue.
So maybe do you want to just ask me another question and chop that piece
okay.
out?
Well, yeah. if I let me see if I can parrot it back to you to see and make sure. There are the genius quota or quotient, however, is something that is not measurable, but it is teachable, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, it is. And it's a skill to be learned. And it's a skill that anyone can learn, but we're not taught it in any way, shape, or form. We're not taught it at school. We're not taught it in business courses. We're just not taught it. And yet it can be taught and it can be learned. And it is a skill. If we look at people that are successful, those people have this skill, and it is very rarely an innate skill. It is usually learnt. And so if one human being can learn something, then chances are other human beings can as well.
But what is this trait? Is it the ability to make people at ease and to hear what they want to have to say and to act on what they say? What is it that you need to do?
Well, the first step is fairly fundamental. And if we look at everybody's behavior, and you think of the iceberg model that Carl Jung developed, which is observable behaviors are the iceberg that you can see, and they're observable in everyday communication. And then underneath the iceberg is things like your values, personality, beliefs, and drivers, and things like that. If we look at part of that, of what's underneath that iceberg, is where inner genius comes in. Is the first step is to understand how you show up to the world. How do you take in information? How do you actually learn? And not many people know how they learn. We just get up in the morning and we just go through our day. And so if we look at this fundamental piece of how do we actually take in information, what we realize is that everybody does it a little bit differently. And we all have our preferences. And once you understand your preference of how you take in information, you go, oh my goodness, that explains so much. But what it also explains is that potentially the people around you are very different to you. They're very different in the way they take in information. So we spend our days communicating with other people our way, when in actual fact, what we could be doing as an instant way to connect and lock into other people is actually communicate in their way, communicate in a way that makes them feel more connected, makes them feel like, wow, this person is just like me. So communicating their way is the first step.
Okay, that's the first step. Now, what's the second? Once you understand that people hear you differently than you think you're projecting, if I'm hearing you correctly, then you have to figure out ways of doing, of going and finding out how they want to be told.
Yes, that's exactly right. And when we look at that, that becomes where the skill gets honed. So if we look at the skill of communicating in other people's preference, then that potentially feels like a massive change for someone to undertake, but it's actually not. As part of the book and as part of the profile of Inner Genius, I've provided templates and tools for people to use when they write their next email, for when they do their next presentation, for when they have an important message to send to their team, or for where they're talking to customers. And I've created tools so that regardless of what your preference is, and they're called Inner Genius archetypes, what your archetype is one of 12 archetypes. So if you can spot someone else's archetype and talk their way, that's great. But you may not have the skill to do that. You may not have the skill to be able to receive information from that person in their general conversation and then communicate back to them. And that's okay, because the tools help you to send one communication to perhaps someone you don't know, a customer, for example, or a group of people that hooks in all 12 archetypes at once. Now, that sounds like you have to do a whole lot of work, but you actually don't. It's just a restructuring and adding in words that connect with every archetype. not just yours.
A difficult thing to do, but how do you do it?
Well, that's why I've got the tools and templates for people to follow, so that until it becomes a natural skill, just like we learned how to drive and now we do it in, with it just so totally unconsciously competent, it needs to become a skill. And so as you're learning that skill, that's where you might follow the template. You might open up, for example, one of the PowerPoint files that's already been structured for you. And then eventually you get to the stage where you go, oh, I've got this and I can do it without using the ingenious tools as you advance further and further. But it's not, it sounds like a big deal, but it's really not. I was working with a CEO of a really large organization, and he asked me to look at one of his communications that he was pretty proud of. And it was good. He was on video, he was talking to his entire group, and he did a great job. Except when I did some microsurgery on actually the words that he was using, he was only hooking in to his archetype, people like him, and 3 others. And the 4th one was a bit dodgy, really. It was just there. So really, he was only communicating to about a quarter of his team. Now, this was a CEO of a large organization, 100,000 people. And so he's an excellent CEO and an excellent communicator, and he looked great on video, fabulous. But he could have done such a better job, but he didn't know that he didn't know. So all I did to that 6-minute video was I got the transcript of it, and I added 105 words to that transcript and said, here are the words that I've added, and you are now communicating and hooking in instead of 25,000 people, you're now hooking in 100,000 people. And he just couldn't believe it. He said, but it sounds so much like what I was doing. I said, yeah, all I did was change a couple of words and add a few more words. Like 100 words over a 5 or 6 minute video is nothing. But that 100 words hooked in 75,000 extra people. And he said, that is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. Because now, he said, how do I do that next time? I said, next time, when you're planning out your next video next month, because he does it on a monthly basis, the CEO report, follow this template and just put your points in this. It's called the Ingenious Wheel. Put your points using this Ingenious Wheel and then talk to those points. I said, done. And as you're talking, use some of these words which are on the template, include some of these words as you go around, just use some of those words and it will sound great. And what will happen is you will have a better connection with all of your people and who are global. So all different countries and cultures, and you will have a better connection. Therefore, you'll be communicating and locking into those people. Therefore, you'll be able to be way more influential. So off he went and he's on his way.
Well, I often think if you go to like a technical meeting, they'll sit there and hit, they'll say, well, there's an RMB or an FMN or whatever else. And it seems to me that they're excluding people from the discussion rather than including.
Correct. Quite unconsciously. Because it's so easy for them to talk in their language. It's so easy. They know what all those acronyms mean. It's that, what about the rest of us? Yeah, so it's very unconscious. So it's about bringing that into someone's consciousness to go, wow, I think I can do this a little bit better. And then taking those first steps to do it. In every email, in every report, in every presentation, every time you talk to a customer, you just tweak it a little bit. to just try to hook in and really connect into that other person.
Will you hold up your book once more and tell us the title and where people can get it?
Sure. So this book is Unlock Inner Genius, and it's Power Your Pathway to Extraordinary Success. And so you can get it on Amazon or anywhere, but you can also get the ebook immediately from our website, which is innergeniusnow.com.
Okay. Well, we have just a few minutes left. What would you like to leave our audience with today?
I think your audience being in small business is super challenging. And it's really about how do you get the edge in small business. So I've had my business, which I would consider a small business. It's global. So we have offices in the US, in California, in New York, in London, in Switzerland, in Australia, in Singapore. So we have global offices, but essentially I run a small business. And it's always about saying, as a business owner, how do I get that edge? How do I get that edge over my clients so that I brick wall them and they're mine for life? How do I get that edge in the suppliers that I'm using, with the vendors that I'm using? How do I get that edge in business with marketing and so on? And doing the same thing over and over again is just crazy, right? And in this time of this era, we need to be looking for not necessarily the big things that we need to do in business, but it's the small things. And where I come into play to help is in those small things. It's in every email. It's in every employee discussion. It's the way you wake up and talk to your family in the morning. You know, it's those small things that the cumulative result can be a massive change. And rather than just working on, hey, let's do a new marketing plan, or let's do a marketing strategy, or let's do a new sales strategy, or let's do new product, or let's find whatever we're doing in our company to make us try to get the edge. What I would say to small business owners is actually, this is really accessible and you can start right now. You can start with the next email that you send, whether it's good, bad, difficult, or indifferent, whatever that content of that email is, to make that better. The next conversation you have with one of your employees, to make that connect and stick better. You can do that, the small things. And it's those things that may end up having a bigger cumulative effect faster. And if everybody in the organization is communicating in this way, so if you do Inner Genius for your entire organization, whether it's just you, whether it's 10 people, whether it's 100 people, however many people, if everybody is communicating in this way, all of a sudden life becomes a little bit easier because everyone's got that better connection to each other, to their work, and to customers that you're serving. So it just ends up being a bit of a happier place. And so what I would say to people is start really small, start really tiny, tiny steps, which may end up, when you look back on it, being a really massive change.
Well, on that note, we're going to say goodbye to Catherine Matiske. Matiske. Okay? No, Matiske? Did I pronounce it correct?
Yep.
Okay. You know, it's interesting. People say that they remembered the names better because of my stumbling over them. So I hope you don't mind. But anyway, it's been a very illuminating time together. And thank you all the way from Australia. The world's a different place than when I started out.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And have a great year.
Thank you.